Hi everyone, welcome to part three of my UDL series. We're going to continue from where we left essentially in the past video where we were discussing multiple means of representation. I guess another element that I felt that was very important for me in supporting my students was finding ways to activate their prior knowledge. The module that I was teaching covered quite a lot of new content, and I wanted students to realize that much of it actually was connected to things that they already knew or had experienced before, even if they didn't recognize it immediately. My goal was to help them build on what they already knew or understood rather than just introducing a whole new set of ideas that perhaps felt unfamiliar or overwhelming. I also wanted to give them an opportunity to discover the key concepts for themselves rather than just, drowning them with a lot of information. Hopefully, this approach gave them time to think, process, and make the connections between the new material and their existing knowledge, whether that was from previous experiences, earlier classes that we've done together, or their own cultural or educational backgrounds. For me, it was really about encouraging that gradual process and constructing understanding piece by piece in a way that hopefully made sense to them. And here I have two examples of how I try to activate students' prior knowledge in practice. In the first activity, I used a reflection task to get students thinking about different learning strategies they had used in their previous educational experiences. The idea was to help them realize that they already had the knowledge and experience related to this topic, they just might not have used the same terminology before. So before introducing, this concept formally, I asked them to reflect on how they used to study, what techniques worked for them, and what didn't. Then, once that background knowledge was activated, I introduced the concept of learning strategies and gave them examples. Interestingly, many of the students shared things that they were already using in one form or another. Maybe they just haven't labeled them in a way that I introduced the topic or the strategy. And then the second example is a little bit more visual. I had this picture of a man with an hourglass um, on his back, and I used this as a thinking prop to introduce the topic of time management. I asked students first to think individually about what the image might mean and then kind of discuss it with the partner. And after, a few seconds or a few minutes, many of them realized that the image was representing stealing time or time thieves. From there, we worked together to build a quick list of what they would consider their own time thieves, okay? Things like scrolling on their phone, spending too much time, perhaps on different types of social media or Netflix, or just simply procrastinating. Once we had that discussion, again, I formally introduced the topic of time management and formally introduced the concept of time thieves, and how it's important to be essentially aware of them when you're plan different things, or to essentially to help work more effectively. Okay, then another key aspect I focused on was providing step by step scaffolding in class to guide learners through their assignments. As I mentioned earlier, my classroom was quite diverse. Some students already had academic experience, while for others, this was their very first time studying in kind of in the third level education. And of course, everything was in English, which added kind of another layer of challenge. So I wanted to make sure everything had a clear instructions and I could build their understanding gradually. To do that, I broke down each assignment into small parts, and each week we focused on one specific stage, which was then directly connected to the final assignment. Hopefully this approach helps students to see how to piece each part together and gave them time to develop their ideas step by step. And yeah, I also made sure my instructions were as clear as possible, so there was no confusion about what was expected. And at the end of each class, I always allocated some time for a Q&A session to address any questions or concerns, and often stay behind if I could. If I didn't have another class, I stayed behind just to chat with anybody who needed extra support or clarification. And here again, we have some examples. So on the left, you can see a kind of a stock image of a girl. I named her Sarah. This activity was part of the assignment focusing on kind of goal setting, essentially. A student had to identify their own goals, but also to think about kind of the barriers or the challenges they might face while trying to achieve those goals. To introduce the concept and help them prepare for the assignment, I used Sarah's story as a starting point. We talked about different goals that Sarah had. For example, she wanted to complete her business degree, to improve her English, and eventually to find a good job. And then on the same slide, I kind of added different icons that were representing different aspects of her life, like travel, socializing, and spending time on social media. And students were thinking or working with a partner, depending on their preference, but they were kind of discussing what challenges might Sarah face in trying to reach her goals. I think the visuals helped make the discussion a little bit more engaging and relatable. Students were clearly could see, oh yeah, it's clear that Sarah wants to have social life. Perhaps she spends a little bit too much time on TikTok, and she really wants to travel, to see the world. And all of these could be potential distractions. After that, we brainstorm for some strategies to overcome these challenges. For example, some students suggested that Sarah could still enjoy socializing, but maybe limited to once a week, like maybe go out for a drink every Friday night or so. Others said, like, look, we all love scrolling, but maybe she can only scroll when she's commuting or something like that. And for travel, they were saying, like, look, maybe she could create a bucket list, start saving and start planning all of her trips, start saving now and planning her trips, and then she could do them once she finishes her degree. It was a simple activity, but it really encouraged students to think critically and then apply these ideas to their own goals. So after we completed this whole life story of Sarah, this stock image essentially that I found on Canva, but after completing this activity, students had a solid foundation of what they needed to do. So then they could apply what we learned and how we did the activity for Sarah. They can then apply it and write it out of their own needs, essentially. So I provided a set of guiding questions to encourage them to think about their own goals, setbacks, and the strategies they can use to overcome these challenges. Um, I really want these questions to help them reflect on what might get in their way of their own progress on their own goals. Um, I think this approach worked really well because students could see first the idea in action through an example and then apply it to themselves with structured support. I kind of used a similar process for quite a lot of examples on the module to prep for the assignments. We always kind of try to look at a clear example or a model, and then I would guide students through step-by-step questions to help them transfer that learning into their own work. Because again, the module was all about self-reflection and self-understanding. All right. I also then really wanted to provide examples for my students. So, actually, when I was doing my master's at Griffin College Dublin, some of my lectures used examples from previous students to illustrate what a good piece of work looked like. And honestly, as a student myself, I found that incredibly helpful, and because it gave me such a clear understanding what I was being asked to do. And honestly, I really think it helped me to get higher grades because I could visually see um, what I needed to do. So I really wanted to offer the same kind of clarity to my own students. The challenge, of course, was that this was a brand new module, and I wanted to do this for the very first cohort as well. So, of course, I didn't have any real students' work to use as an examples. Okay, so instead, I decided to create my own examples. One, a strong version of each assignment, something that would score really high marks, and then another kind of a weaker version that would show a very low scoring piece of work, or even if it was like a fail, essentially. And I believe that this way students could see what was expected and what might lead to like a better mark, essentially. Another thing that was very important to me, I didn't want to just give them the assignment, the written assignment, for example, or the poster and be like, this is good, just copy it. I really wanted them to think why this was good and why it wasn't. So during class, we discussed and looked at the examples together, and I didn't tell them. Yeah, so I did showed them the two different, the good and the bad, essentially, and I didn't tell them which one was good, which one was bad. I wanted them to figure it out for themselves. So they either worked again individually or as a partner and try to analyze these two samples and decide for themselves which one was the stronger and which one was weaker and why. And this often sparked a really interesting discussion because sometimes it was immediately clear which one was better, but other times it took a bit of critical thinking to identify the differences. And yeah, so let me show you the example. Here I have one of the assignments, which was a poster. So in this assignment, yeah, students had to create a poster, and they kind of had to pick a course they were wanting to study and say what are their goals, why, and kind of identify some of the skills. And on the left, you can see an example of a poster that would score quite low for different reasons. So first of all, not even nothing to do with the graphic design skills, but mostly because um, the assignment brief specifically said that they had to identify 5 soft skills and 5 hard skills, and we can see that it's not the case on the poster. And also business as a hard skill, it's a little bit confusing. So then additional information. Again, here we can see that the student just copied, well, the student, me, who created this bad example, but they just copied and pasted a description of the course. That's not what they were being asked to do. They were being asked, why do they want to study this course, essentially. So again, the students would, for this activity, they would talk and discuss. And I don't know, I think presenting the two side by side made really clear for the students, and hopefully helped them to really understand what they needed to do.